As presidential euphemisms go, it's chilling, isn't it? Things happen. It's one thing to talk like that about a trade dispute or a diplomatic snub. It's quite another to use that phrase about a man who walked into a consulate in Istanbul, was suffocated, dismembered, very probably dissolved. Jamal Khashoggi did not simply happen. He was murdered and then cut up and put into a suitcase. Yet in the Oval Office, with Mohammed bin Salman to decide, Donald Trump's instinct was not to speak for the murdered journalist or for the CIA officers who risked their careers to tell inconvenient truths, or for the allies who took the Khashoggi case seriously. His instinct was to protect his guest and to attack the person who raised the question. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that. He snapped at ABC's Mary Bruce as if the real offence of the story was not the extrajudicial killing of a dissident, but the breach of etiquette in mentioning it a photo op. Khashoggi becomes extremely controversial, a gentleman a lot of people didn't like. His crime is relativised, the victim is smeared, the journalist asking a perfectly legitimate question is transformed into the villain of the piece. Oh, ABC News? Fake news. Fake news. This is not accidental, it's a moral reframing exercise. Trump offers MBS 3 gifts in a single answer. First, he questions the victim. If Khashoggi was controversial, perhaps we can stop treating his death as an outrage and start treating it as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Second, he divorces the crime from the man most likely to have ordered it. He knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that, in flat contradiction of the 2021 US intelligence assessment, which concluded that the Crown Prince approved the operation to capture or kill Khashoggi. And third, he turns accountability into rudeness. The problem is no longer that a dissident was chopped up in a consulate. The problem is that a reporter is embarrassing a royal guest. Notice the pattern in Trump's handling of scrutiny. Mary Bruce asks an entirely orthodox question about the Trump family's business links with Saudi partners, about why Americans should trust a leader US intelligence says ordered a killing, and then about the Epstein files. In response, Trump does two things. First, he personalizes it. Who are you with? Oh, I think you're a terrible reporter. You're a terrible person. The question is never allowed to stand on its own. It must be recast as an act of insolence by a presumptuous journalist. Second, he reaches for institutional punishment. He muses aloud about pulling ABC's license, accuses the network of being a perpetrator, and brands the Epstein transparency push a democratic hoax, even as the House is voting 427-1 to force the release of the files. So we have a president who is exquisitely sensitive to the dignity of a visiting crown prince and aggressively indifferent to the safety and freedom of the press in his own country. Set this against the widow, Hanan Elat Khashoggi's response is dignified and simple, describing her husband as good, transparent and brave. She reminds the world that being controversial is not a capital crime and certainly not grounds for butchery. She calls on MBS to meet her, apologise and compensate her for the murder of her husband. The contrast couldn't be starker. Trump's language treats Khashoggi as a reputational inconvenience. His widow treats him as a person whose life had meaning and whose loss still has consequence. Around this moral drama sits an enormous transactional frame. The red carpet, the cavalry on the South Lawn, the flyover of F-15s and F-35s, the presidential walk of fame, the black-tie dinner in the East Room, and the promise of Saudi investment swelling from $600 billion to a supposed $1 trillion in the United States. This is not just hospitality, it is a visual statement. The era of MBS's awkward isolation is over. The price of readmission to polite company is not accountability for past crimes, but a sufficiently large enough check and a sufficiently bold enough defence deal. Trump praises the Crown Prince's incredible human rights record while preparing to sell him the most advanced stealth fighter in the American arsenal, of an aircraft whose flight time to Israel is measured in minutes. Israel understandably asks for conditions and security guarantees. Trump's answer is to assure everyone that we trust them. and to treat concerns as details to be hammered out later. It is here that the slogan, "Don't embarrass our guest," becomes truly revealing. It signals that courtesy to power has been elevated above solidarity with victims. It tells every dissident and every exile that their safety is negotiable in the face of investment promises and global theatre. It tells every future Khashoggi that if they are inconvenient enough, the worst thing that can be said of their killers is that things happen. It also tells us something about the way Trump understands the presidency. He complains about Mary Bruce's attitude and calls her question insubordinate. But journalists are not subordinates. They are not courtiers. Their task is not to flatter the host or spare the guest blushes. It is to ask precisely the question that makes both men uncomfortable. Why should Americans trust a leader whom their own intelligence service believe ordered a murder? Even Mohammed bin Salman's answer, carefully crafted though it was, acknowledges more than Trump does. He calls the killing really painful, a huge mistake, insists Saudi Arabia did all the right steps of investigation, and promises reforms to ensure nothing happens like that again. That is not accountability, but it is at least an admission that something profound, something went wrong, something wrong occurred. Trump's answer, by contrast, is a studied act of forgetting. If a victim is controversial, if the leader knew nothing, if the journalist is the problem, then the murder can be smoothed away as a regrettable incident on a road to $1 trillion partnership. So, what is this visit? It is many things at once. It's a personal reunion. Trump and the man he calls a friend, exchanging compliments in front of cameras, walking down a colonnade lined with portraits, pausing by a caricature of Joe Biden's auto pen. It is a policy pivot, a clear signal that under this administration, Saudi Arabia is not a pariah but a preferred partner, a state that can expect not only weapons and nuclear cooperation but public praise on human rights and everything else. It's a regional play, an attempt to draw Saudi Arabia fully into the Abraham Accords architecture, with MBS politely but firmly insisting that normalization with Israel will require a credible path to a Palestinian state, and it is, quite brutally, a lesson in impunity. If you have enough oil, enough capital, enough strategic weight, then pariah status is temporary. The outrage of 2018 can be laundered through investment forums and fighter jet contracts. The sawdust can be swept up and the band can play again on the South Lawn. And in that sense, "Don't embarrass our guest" is more than irritated asides from a president to a reporter. It is a governing philosophy. Do not embarrass the powerful. Do not confront them with their potential crimes. Do not permit awkward intelligence assessments, widows' demands, or journalistic questions to spoil the choreography. The question for the rest of us is whether we are prepared to live with that philosophy, because if "things happen" is allowed to stand as an explanation for Khashoggi's fate, it will become the catch-all alibi for every dissident silenced, every critic kidnapped, every exile disappeared. Jamal Khashoggi's widow is right. There is no justification for his murder. The task of diplomatic leaders is not to find one, but to insist that some things do not just happen. They are done by people, in systems, on orders, and those orders, however apparently expensively dressed or ceremonially greeted, are not above embarrassment. They are exactly where scrutiny begins, and journalists are entitled to ask those questions and to expect some sort of answer, not to be shot down and told that they're fake. This is a most extraordinary diplomatic moment.